I'm Eleanor Thompson, 68 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like when I lost my husband of 40 years. But nothing prepared me for hearing my daughter-in-law Bridget scream, "This is not your house," in the home Frank and I had built together, where we raised our son Robert. The shock froze me in place as I realized the sweet woman who'd married my son was plotting to take everything from me. What happened next changed all our lives forever. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when family turned against you. The house at 342 Maple Street wasn't just a building to me. Franklin and I purchased it 43 years ago, just 2 years after we got married. We were so young and full of dreams back then. The neighborhood was up and coming, the price was just within our reach if we stretched our budget, and the moment we walked through those doors, we knew it was meant to be our forever home. Frank worked as an engineer while I taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We saved every penny to make the down payment, and I still remember the day we got the keys. Frank carried me across the threshold like we were newlyweds all over again, both of us laughing with joy and nervousness about the massive commitment we just made. We spent the first few years fixing it up together on weekends. Frank was handy with tools, and I had an eye for colors and design. The kitchen cabinets we installed ourselves, the hardwood floors we refinished during one sweaty summer, and the garden we planted one section at a time as our budget allowed. Every corner of that house held a memory of our hands working together to build our dream. For 7 years we tried to have a child. The disappointment month after month nearly broke us, but Frank never wavered in his support. "It'll happen when it's meant to," he'd say, holding me through tears after another negative test. And then, finally, our miracle happened. Robert came into our world after a difficult pregnancy, and suddenly, our house truly became a home. That house witnessed Robert's first steps across the living room floor. It echoed with his laughter as he grew from a curious toddler to an athletic teenager. The mark on the kitchen doorframe tracked his height from age 3 to 18. His graduation party spilled from the backyard deck Frank built when Robert turned 10. Every milestone of our son's life was embedded in those walls. Frank passed away 5 years ago. Heart disease took him suddenly one Tuesday afternoon while he was working in the garden. One moment he was planting tomatoes and the next he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, and for the first year I could barely function. Robert was already living in the city by then, working at a prestigious law firm, but he came home every weekend to check on me. Learning to live alone in our house was the hardest adjustment. The empty space beside me in bed. The silence at the breakfast table where Frank used to do crossword puzzles. The garden he'd loved so much, which I had to learn to maintain alone. But slowly I rebuilt my life. I joined a widow's support group, took up water aerobics at the community center, and made new friends who understood my loss. Robert was my rock during those dark days. He called daily, brought groceries every Sunday, and made sure I was taking care of myself. That's why I was so thrilled when he met Bridget at his law firm, where she worked as a paralegal. After their first date, he called me, sounding more animated than he had in years. "Mom, she's amazing," he gushed. "Smart, funny, and so easy to talk to." Their romance moved quickly. Within 6 months, Robert brought Bridget home to meet me. She was beautiful with auburn hair and a dazzling smile. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. She asked about family photos, complimented the house, and insisted on helping with dinner preparation. By the end of the evening, I was completely charmed. When Robert announced their engagement just 2 weeks later, I was surprised but supportive. "When you know," he said, echoing what his father had always said about us. I threw myself into helping plan their wedding, which they decided would be a small ceremony in my backyard, under the oak tree Frank had planted when we first moved in. The wedding day was perfect. Bridget looked radiant, and Robert had never seemed happier. I cried through the entire ceremony, feeling both joy for their beginning and sadness that Frank wasn't there to see his son married. During the reception, Bridget hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for raising such an amazing man. I promise to make him happy." 2 weeks after returning from their honeymoon in Hawaii, Robert and Bridget came over for Sunday dinner with news. "Mom," Robert said, taking Bridget's hand, "we've been thinking. Housing prices in the city are insane right now, and we're trying to save for our own place. What would you think if we moved in here temporarily? Just for a year or so while we build our nest egg. The idea of having company in my too quiet house was immediately appealing. This place is too big for just me anyway, I said, genuinely excited. You'd be doing me a favor. Bridget rushed to hug me. We'll help with everything, she promised. Maintenance, cooking, yard work. You won't have to lift a finger. The first few months were wonderful. We settled into an easy routine. Bridget and I would cook dinner together while Robert handled yard work on weekends. We played board games in the evenings and watched movies on the big TV Robert insisted on buying to upgrade the living room. Bridget took an interest in my container gardening on the back porch, and I taught her my secret recipe for apple pie that had been in my family for generations. Looking back, there were subtle signs I missed. The way Bridget rearranged the kitchen cabinets without asking. Her comments about the dated wallpaper in the guest bathroom. The time she suggested my bedroom furniture might look better in the guest room, since it was so traditional. But I was so grateful for the company, and so happy to see Robert settled that I dismissed these moments as simple enthusiasm for making a home. How could I have known that beneath her warm smile, Bridget was making plans that would shatter my world? The shift in Bridget's behavior was so gradual that at first, I doubted my own perceptions. It began with small changes around the house about 3 months after they moved in. I came home from my book club one Tuesday to find the living room furniture completely rearranged. The sofa where Frank and I had spent countless evenings was now against a different wall, and the antique side tables that had been wedding gifts were nowhere to be seen. I thought we'd try something new, Bridget explained when I asked, not quite meeting my eyes. The room gets better light this way, and it creates a better flow. I wanted to object, to explain the comfort I found in keeping things the way they'd always been, but I swallowed my protest. It's different, I managed, and Bridget seemed to take that as approval. The following week, I noticed my collection of family photos that had lined the hallway for decades were gone, replaced by abstract art prints I'd never seen before. Where are my photos? I asked Robert that evening. Bridget put them in albums to protect them, he replied, barely looking up from his phone. She thought it would look cleaner this way. The frames were collecting dust. Those photographs had documented our entire family history. I dusted those frames every week without complaint. But again I said nothing, not wanting to seem difficult or ungrateful for their company. Soon, more of my belongings began migrating to the attic or garage. My mother's china cabinet was deemed too bulky for the dining room. The handmade quilts I'd collected were making the place look cluttered. The rocking chair where I'd nursed Robert as a baby disappeared while I was visiting my sister Harriet for a weekend. When I did gather the courage to object, Bridget had a knack for making me feel unreasonable. Eleanor, we're just trying to update things a bit, she'd say with a tight smile. Don't you want the house to look its best? Robert, meanwhile, seemed increasingly absent. His hours at the law firm grew longer, and when he was home he was distracted, always deferring to Bridget on household matters. Whatever you think is best, honey, became his standard response to any discussion. Our shared meals became strained. What began as cozy family dinners evolved into Bridget dominating conversations, often talking over me or dismissing my contributions with a quick, "That's nice, Eleanor." She started preparing elaborate meals that ignored my dietary preferences, then seemed offended when I couldn't finish everything. "I spent hours making this carbonara," she snapped one evening when I only ate half my portion. "Some appreciation would be nice." "Mom's never been a big pasta eater," Robert said, a rare moment of him speaking up for me. Bridget's face darkened. "Well, when someone cooks for you, you eat it. That's just good manners." The subtle digs at my age became more frequent. "Eleanor, be careful on those stairs," she'd say when I'd been navigating them without issue for 40 years. "Or should you be lifting that? At your age, you need to be careful." Each comment reinforced the message. I was old, fragile, and increasingly in the way. One afternoon, I overheard Bridget on the phone in the kitchen. "Living with an old lady isn't what I signed up for," she was saying to someone, her voice low but intense. "The house is amazing, but she's everywhere all the time, with her opinions and her outdated everything. Robert doesn't see it, but I'm at my limit." The words stung like a physical slap. In my own home, I was being discussed as a burden. That night, I couldn't sleep, replaying her words and wondering how things had gone so wrong. Thanksgiving brought matters to a head. For 40 years, I'd hosted our family holiday in my home. I had traditions, recipes, and a system that worked beautifully. But 3 weeks before the holiday, Bridget announced she would be taking over. "I've already invited my parents and my sister's family," she informed me over breakfast. "I'm thinking we'll do a more modern menu this year. Your traditional stuff is a bit heavy." "But everyone loves my cornbread stuffing and pecan pie," I protested. "Your brother-in-law Tom specifically asked if I'd be making them again this year." Bridget's smile was cold. "I'm sure they'll love my new recipes even more. It's time for some fresh traditions, don't you think?" On Thanksgiving Day, I found myself relegated to a corner of my own kitchen, watching as Bridget commanded the space. The turkey was dry, the cranberry sauce came from a can, and my beloved china remained in the cabinet while Bridget used modern square plates she'd purchased. Robert's cousins kept glancing my way questioningly, but I forced a smile and pretended everything was fine. After dinner, Bridget's mother Tina cornered me while helping clear plates. "It's so generous of you to let the kids take over," she said, her tone suggesting I should be grateful. "At our age, it's nice to pass the torch, isn't it? Bridget tells me you'll be redecorating the master bedroom next. She has such a good eye for design." I nearly dropped the plates I was holding. The master bedroom was my sanctuary, the one place Bridget hadn't yet invaded, and I had never discussed redecorating it. The realization hit me like ice water. They were systematically taking over my entire home, room by room, while pushing me into an increasingly smaller corner of my life. That night, after everyone left and the kitchen was finally clean, I sat alone in my bedroom, the only space that still felt truly mine. Something had to change. This was still my house, my home filled with 40 years of memories with Frank. I couldn't let it be erased room by room. But confronting the situation would mean potentially damaging my relationship with Robert, the most important person in my life. How had it come to this impossible choice? As I finally drifted to sleep, I realized with growing clarity that something in this household was very, very wrong. The moment everything changed happened on a rainy Tuesday in January. I'd been looking for my reading glasses and thought perhaps I'd left them in the small desk in the den. As I opened the drawer, I found my financial folder spread out, clearly recently examined. My bank statements, insurance policies, and the property deed to the house were all there, with sticky notes attached in Bridget's distinctive handwriting. A cold feeling spread through my chest as I read notes like substantial savings and no mortgage scribbled in the margins. On the deed to my home, she'd written transfer options with a question mark. I was still staring at the documents, hands shaking, when Bridget walked in. Her expression shifted from surprise to defensive anger in an instant. "Those are private," she snapped, moving quickly to gather the papers. "They're my financial documents," I replied, finding my voice. "In my desk. In my house. I think I'm the one who deserves privacy here, Bridget." Her face flushed. "Robert asked me to look into some things. For estate planning purposes. For your benefit." Before I could respond, Robert appeared in the doorway. "What's going on?" "Your wife is going through my financial information without my knowledge or permission," I said, turning to my son with the papers still clutched in my hand. "Can you explain why?" I expected Robert to be shocked, to apologize, to stand with me against this invasion of privacy. Instead, he sighed heavily, as if I was being difficult. "Mom, we've been meaning to talk to you about this. Bridget has a friend whose mother moved to Sunny Pines Retirement Village last year. She loves it there. We thought it might be something for you to consider." The betrayal was so stunning I could barely breathe. "You want me to move to a retirement home? This is my house, Robert. Your father and I paid for it. We raised you here." Bridget stepped forward, her tone condescending. "Eleanor, be reasonable. This house is too big for you to manage alone. You're getting older, and the stairs are becoming a safety issue. We're just thinking about your future." "I'm not alone," I said, my voice shaking. "You both live here, and I manage just fine." Robert wouldn't meet my eyes. "It was always the plan for us to take over the house eventually, Mom. Dad and I discussed it years ago." This was an outright lie. Frank would never have discussed giving away our home without including me. Your father would never have suggested I be pushed out of my own home. Never. The conversation deteriorated from there. Robert claimed vague memories of discussions with his father, while Bridget became increasingly agitated. We've put our own home buying plans on hold to help you, she said, as if living rent-free in my home was some great sacrifice. That night, I barely slept, replaying the confrontation and decades of memories in this house. The next morning, I called my oldest friend Margaret for coffee. They're trying to take your house? Margaret was outraged when I explained the situation. Eleanor, have you checked the property documents recently? Is the house still in your name only? I hadn't even considered this possibility. Frank left everything to me. The house should be in my name alone. Check, Margaret insisted. And call Patricia. Patricia Williams had been our family attorney for 30 years. That afternoon, while Robert and Bridget were at work, I pulled out the actual deed and other documents from our fireproof safe. To my relief, the house was indeed solely in my name. Frank had left everything to me, with Robert as the beneficiary after my death. I called Patricia immediately and made an appointment for the following day. Her advice was clear and comforting. Eleanor, that house is legally yours. No one can force you to leave or sign it over. Not your son, not your daughter-in-law, not anyone. Armed with this knowledge, I felt stronger. But the situation at home continued to deteriorate. I discovered real estate websites left open on the shared computer, with searches for major renovations and mother-in-law suites. The implications were clear. They weren't planning for me to leave. They were planning to relegate me to a small portion of my own home. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between Robert and Bridget late one night. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried from the kitchen as I came downstairs for a glass of water. We need to push harder on the Sunny Pines idea, Bridget was saying. Once we have the house to ourselves, we can finally start the renovations. The realtor said with updates, this place could be worth twice what your parents paid. Mom's stubborn, Robert replied, sounding tired. She still thinks of this as her and Dad's place. It is her place technically, Bridget said, her tone calculating. But she's not going to live forever, and we're the ones who will inherit it. It makes more sense for her to sign it over now so we can improve it. It's the practical solution. I know, Robert agreed. She's just being emotional about it. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart breaking. My son, who I'd raised with love in this very house, was discussing my home as if it was already his, and my feelings as inconvenient obstacles to their plans. The depth of the betrayal left me breathless. Over the next week, I carefully observed their behavior with new awareness. The constant suggestions about retirement communities, Bridget bringing home brochures for active senior living, Robert mentioning friends whose parents had made the transition and were so much happier. I made another appointment with Patricia, this time bringing all the documentation I could find. I need to understand my options, I told her, because I'm not leaving my home. You don't have to, she assured me, but given what you've told me, you might want to consider protecting yourself legally. As I drove home from her office, a plan began forming in my mind. Robert and Bridget had betrayed my trust and were trying to manipulate me out of my own home. If they wanted this house so badly, perhaps it was time to show them exactly what they stood to lose. I decided to confront Robert and Bridget during Sunday dinner, our one remaining family tradition. I prepared all of Robert's childhood favorites: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. As we sat around the dining table that Frank had built by hand, I gathered my courage. I visited Patricia Williams yesterday, I said calmly as we finished our meal. Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mom's attorney, he explained to Bridget, who was suddenly very interested in rearranging her napkin. Yes, I continued. I wanted to review my property documents. It seems there's been some confusion about the ownership of this house. What confusion? Bridget asked, her voice falsely light. We all know this is your house, Eleanor. Do we? I asked, looking directly at her. Because I've overheard discussions suggesting otherwise. I've found my financial documents examined without my permission. I've seen retirement community brochures appearing mysteriously in my mail. Robert set down his fork. Mom, we're just trying to help you plan for the future. My future is not your decision to make, I replied firmly. This house belongs to me. Your father left it to me, not to both of us. I have no intention of moving to a retirement community or being relegated to a small suite in my own home. Bridget's face flushed dark red. She slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. This is not your house anymore, she shouted, her voice shrill with anger. You're being completely selfish. We have plans for this place, we need the space. And you're just one person rattling around in a 4-bedroom house. The raw truth of her feelings stunned me into momentary silence. Robert looked horrified but said nothing to defend me. Bridget, he finally murmured, calm down. No, she continued, standing now. I'm tired of pretending. We moved in here with the understanding that eventually this would be our house. We've put our lives on hold, delayed having children, everything. All while waiting for her to be reasonable. I found my voice again. What understanding exactly? Because I certainly wasn't part of any such arrangement. Robert looked uncomfortable. Mom, we thought you understood the arrangement. When we moved in, it was with the idea that eventually, well, this would become our family home. So you were just waiting for me to what? Move away? Sign over my home to you out of gratitude for your company. My voice was steady despite the pain gripping my chest. Don't be dramatic, Bridget snapped. You're getting older. This house is too much for you. We thought you'd appreciate having everything taken care of while you enjoy your retirement in a more appropriate setting. The condescension in her tone was the final straw. I want you both to leave, I said quietly. What? Robert looked shocked. You heard me. This is my house. I want you to leave. Now. Bridget actually laughed. We're not going anywhere. Where would we go? We've been living here for 8 months. That was your choice, I replied. And now I'm making mine. I want you out by the end of the month. Robert finally found his backbone, unfortunately not in my defense. Mom, be reasonable. We can't just leave. We don't have anywhere else lined up. That's not my problem, I said, rising from the table. I've been more than generous allowing you to live here rent-free. That generosity ends now. Bridget's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful old woman. After everything we've done for you. Robert, are you going to let her talk to me like this? Robert looked torn. Mom, please, let's discuss this calmly. We can find a compromise. The time for compromise has passed, I said firmly. Your wife has made your position quite clear. You believed you could pressure me out of my own home. You were wrong. What are you going to do? Bridget sneered. Call the police on your own son? Force us out onto the street? Or maybe you'll just have another convenient heart attack like Frank did, and save us all the trouble. The cruelty of her words left an icy silence in the room. Even Robert looked shocked. Bridget, that's enough, he said finally. But it was too late. In that moment I saw them both clearly for perhaps the first time. My son weak and complicit in this betrayal. His wife, nakedly greedy and willing to wish me dead for a house. I'm going to my room, I said quietly. When I come down tomorrow morning, I expect you both to have a plan for moving out. This is not negotiable. I locked my bedroom door that night, something I'd never done before in my own home. I cried myself to sleep, mourning not just the loss of the warm relationship I thought I'd had with my son and daughter-in-law, but the shattering of the future I'd imagined for us all. The next morning, I called Patricia from my cell phone and arranged to meet her at her office. I need to take decisive action, I told her. They've made it clear they won't leave willingly. Patricia listened carefully to my account of the previous night's confrontation. Eleanor, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Unfortunately, even though they don't have a lease, they've established residency. Legally evicting them could take months. I don't have months, I said, feeling suddenly certain. I need them out of my house now. Patricia looked thoughtful. There is another option, though it's rather dramatic. I'm ready for dramatic, I assured her. You could sell the house, she suggested. As the sole owner, that's your right. It would effectively end any claim they think they have. The idea hit me like a thunderbolt. Sell my beloved home? The thought had never occurred to me. But as I considered it, a strange sense of liberation began to take hold. I'd need to move quickly, I said, thinking aloud, before they realize what I'm doing. Patricia nodded. I have a contact at Greenwich Realty. Thomas Baker. He specializes in quick sales for clients in difficult situations. With your permission, I'll call him now. Within 2 hours, I was sitting with Thomas in a coffee shop 3 towns over, well away from any chance of running into Robert or Bridget. The market in your neighborhood is extremely hot right now, Thomas explained. Your house, with its lot size and location, would be very attractive to developers. They'd pay cash and close quickly. How quickly? I asked. 2 weeks, possibly less.
No inspections, no contingencies.
It wouldn't be the absolute top dollar you might get with a traditional listing, but it would be a fair price. More than fair, actually, given the current demand. I took a deep breath. Do it. As Thomas prepared the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of grief and determination. The house held 40 years of memories, every corner a reminder of my life with Frank and raising Robert. But those memories would travel with me. What wouldn't travel was the betrayal, the manipulation, and the disrespect I'd experienced under my own roof. For the next 2 weeks, I maintained a careful facade at home. I acted conciliatory, even apologetic about our argument. Robert seemed relieved, though Bridget remained coldly suspicious. I told them I was considering their suggestions and needed time to think, which seemed to pacify them for the moment. Meanwhile, I worked with Thomas to expedite the sale. A development company made an all-cash offer well above market value. They wanted to build luxury townhomes on the property and were eager to close quickly. I used the time to quietly pack the items that mattered most to me. Family photos, Frank's favorite books, the quilts my grandmother had made. Small treasures that held memories but wouldn't be missed if I removed them from the house. I stored them in my car trunk or at Margaret's house, preparing for my exit. I also began searching for a new home for myself. After decades in a large family house, I was drawn to the idea of a fresh start in a completely different setting. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a doorman building downtown, close to shops, restaurants, and the arts district. It was modern, maintenance-free, and entirely mine. The day of closing arrived while Robert and Bridget were on a weekend trip to visit her parents. I signed the papers in Patricia's office, officially transferring ownership of my family home to Lakeside Development Group. I used part of the proceeds to purchase my condo outright, with plenty left over for a comfortable future. When I returned to the house, a sold sign had already been placed in the front yard. I hired movers to pack the remaining items I wanted to keep and transport them to my new condo. Everything happened with military precision, just as I'd planned with Patricia's help. I was arranging books on my new shelves when my phone began ringing incessantly. Robert. I let it go to voicemail, listening as his messages evolved from confused to panicked to angry. Mom, there's a sold sign in the yard. Call me back immediately. Mom, the neighbors said movers came. What's going on? Where are you? Mom, this isn't funny. You can't just sell the house without telling us. Call me now. Finally, I texted him the address of my new condo and suggested he and Bridget come over to talk. 3 hours later they arrived, both looking shell-shocked and furious. How could you do this? Robert demanded as soon as I opened the door. We came home to a sold sign and half-empty house. Where's our stuff? Your personal belongings are still there, I replied calmly. The new owners have given you 30 days to remove them, as Patricia explained to Bridget when she called our office. You sold our house, Bridget shrieked, her face contorted with rage. Without even telling us. I sold my house, I corrected her. The house that was in my name alone. The house you told me wasn't mine anymore and tried to push me out of. Consider it my response to your arrangement. Robert looked devastated. Mom, where are we supposed to go? We don't have anywhere else lined up. We can't find a place and move in 30 days. You've had 8 months of free housing to save money, I reminded him. Surely you've been setting aside funds as you originally claimed when you moved in with me. The guilty look that passed between them told me everything. They hadn't been saving at all. They'd been spending freely, confident that they'd soon have a mortgage-free house of their own once I was out of the picture. "This is illegal," Bridget sputtered. "We'll sue you." Patricia had prepared me for this. "You're welcome to consult an attorney," I said. But as Patricia will confirm, I was within my legal rights as the sole owner of the property. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm still settling into my new home. I closed the door on their shocked faces, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. For the first time in months, despite the pain and the loss, I felt free. The aftermath of my decision unfolded exactly as Patricia had predicted. Robert and Bridget were legally required to vacate the property within 30 days, as they had established residence but had no formal lease agreement. The developers were actually generous, offering them an additional 2 weeks and even hiring extra movers to expedite the process. I maintained my distance during this time, communicating only through Patricia. The emotional fallout was painful but necessary. Robert called constantly at first, his messages alternating between anger, pleading, and guilt-tripping. "How could you do this to your own son?" he demanded in one voicemail. "Where are we supposed to go on such short notice?" Bridget took a different approach, enlisting her parents to call me. "Eleanor," her mother said stiffly when I answered, not recognizing the number. "Bridget is absolutely distraught. She's been hospitalized for anxiety attacks because of what you've done." I later learned from mutual friends that this was a complete fabrication. Bridget wasn't hospitalized. She was actively searching for an apartment while telling everyone who would listen about her cruel, senile mother-in-law, who had tricked them and left them homeless. The reality, which Robert finally admitted when he came alone to my condo 2 weeks after the sale, was far different. "We never saved anything," he confessed, looking exhausted as he sat on my new sofa. "Bridget kept saying we didn't need to because eventually the house would be ours. We've been living paycheck to paycheck, actually spending more because we thought, well, you know what we thought? That I'd conveniently move aside or die?" I asked bluntly. He had the grace to look ashamed. "It wasn't like that, Mom. Not for me anyway. I really did think you'd be happier in a retirement community with people your own age. The house was so big for just you." "It wasn't just me," I reminded him. "It was the 3 of us. And it could have stayed that way if you and Bridget hadn't tried to push me out." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. "I know. I'm sorry. I should have stood up to her more. I should have protected you." The apology was welcome but insufficient to heal the breach between us. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with mere words. "Where will you go?" I asked, softening slightly. "We found an apartment in Westbrook Heights," he said. "It's small and expensive and Bridget hates it, but it's all we could get on short notice." I nodded, resisting the urge to offer help. They needed to experience the consequences of their actions. It was the only way either of them would learn, especially Bridget. The developers wasted no time once Robert and Bridget moved out. Within days, demolition crews arrived to begin tearing down the house where I'd spent most of my adult life. Margaret offered to drive me past the property, thinking I might want one last look, but I declined. That chapter of my life was closed. The memories that mattered were safely stored in my heart, and in the mementos I'd brought with me. My new life took shape more quickly than I'd anticipated. The condo building had an active community of residents, many around my age, who welcomed me warmly. There was a book club that met in the common room, a walking group that explored downtown every morning, and weekly movie nights in the building's small theater. For the first time in years, I found myself making new friends and developing a social circle independent of my identity as Robert's mother. I joined a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when maintaining our large house. I discovered I had a talent for painting landscapes, particularly garden scenes that reminded me of the beautiful yard Frank and I had created together. The financial windfall from selling the house gave me freedom I'd never expected to have. After consulting with the financial advisor Patricia recommended, I invested the majority of the proceeds, generating enough monthly income to supplement my teacher's pension comfortably. I took my first ever solo vacation, a river cruise through Europe that Frank and I had always dreamed of doing together. I bought myself a new car to replace the 10-year-old sedan I'd been driving, Small luxuries that felt enormous after decades of careful budgeting. Robert and I maintained minimal contact during this period. He called every couple of weeks, our conversation stiff and awkward. Bridget refused to speak to me entirely, which was actually a relief. According to Robert, she'd been forced to return to work full-time since they now had significant rent to pay. The irony that they'd gone from living rent-free in a paid-off house to struggling to afford a two-bedroom apartment wasn't lost on either of us, though we never directly discussed it. 3 months after moving into my condo, I received an unexpected visit. Robert appeared at my door on a Tuesday evening, looking nervous but determined. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Alone. Bridget doesn't know I'm here." I invited him in, curious despite my lingering hurt. "Mom, I owe you a real apology," he began, sitting rigidly on the edge of my sofa. "Not just for what happened with the house, but for how I've treated you these past months. Years, really." He took a deep breath, then continued. "After Dad died, I should have been there for you more. Instead, I got caught up in my own life, my career, then Bridget. I let you down." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Robert. There's more," he said, looking even more uncomfortable. "Bridget is pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." The news hit me with mixed emotions. Joy at the prospect of a grandchild, concern about Bridget as a mother, and sadness that our family situation was so fractured at what should be a happy time. "Congratulations," I said carefully. "When is she due?" "November," he replied. "Look, Mom, I know things are difficult between us, especially between you and Bridget, but I don't want my child growing up without knowing their grandmother. Is there any way we can try to move forward?" It was the opening I'd been waiting for, a chance to rebuild some kind of relationship with my son. But I was wiser now, more protective of my boundaries. "I'd like that," I said. "But it has to be on different terms than before. I won't be manipulated or taken advantage of again, Robert. Not by you, and certainly not by Bridget." He nodded solemnly. "I understand. I've been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened. Bridget and I were not in a good place right now. The pregnancy wasn't planned, and with our financial situation." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Are you asking for money?" I asked directly. "No," he said quickly, then hesitated. "Well, not exactly. The apartment we're in isn't really suitable for a baby. It's right next to a fire station and there's no yard. We were hoping to move before the baby comes, but with Bridget needing to take maternity leave, we can't afford anything better right now." I considered his unspoken request. Part of me wanted to help them, especially with a grandchild on the way. But another part remembered the betrayal, the cruel words, the attempt to push me out of my own home. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But Robert, if I do help, it will be for my grandchild's benefit, and there will be clear terms. I won't just hand over money with no accountability, not after what happened." He seemed to accept this, nodding with resignation. "That's fair. More than fair, considering everything." After he left, I sat in my new living room, watching the city lights come on as evening fell. The life I was living now wasn't the one I'd planned, but in many ways, it was richer and more authentically mine than I could have imagined. The painful betrayal had forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed, and to create a life that reflected my own desires rather than others' expectations. The sweet taste of revenge in selling the house had faded into something more complex and satisfying. Independence. I'd shown Robert and Bridget that I wouldn't be a doormat, that I could and would stand up for myself when pushed. That lesson was worth every painful moment of the journey. As for my future role as a grandmother, I would welcome that joy while maintaining the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. The house that had been the center of our conflict was gone now, replaced by new homes for new families to create their own memories. It seemed fitting somehow, a reminder that nothing lasts forever, but new beginnings are always possible. Life settled into a new rhythm as summer turned to fall. My condo became truly mine as I added personal touches that reflected my personality, rather than decades of family compromises. I painted the living room a soft sage green that I'd always loved but Frank had thought too trendy. I replaced the traditional furniture I'd had for years with more modern, comfortable pieces that suited my current lifestyle. For the first time since getting married at 22, I was creating a space that was entirely my own. The building's social activities became a central part of my life. I joined the Residents' Council and helped organize a successful fundraiser for the local children's hospital. My watercolor hobby blossomed into a genuine talent, with 3 of my paintings selected for display in a local gallery's senior artist showcase. I even started teaching a beginner's class at the community center on Thursday afternoons. Robert continued to call regularly, our relationship slowly healing through careful, honest conversations. Bridget remained distant, though Robert assured me she was working on her feelings about everything that had happened. I took this with a grain of salt, but appreciated that at least one of them was making an effort. As Bridget's pregnancy progressed, financial pressures mounted for the couple. Robert reluctantly admitted they were struggling more than he'd initially let on. The apartment they'd hastily rented after leaving my house was not only small and noisy, but also consumed nearly half their combined income. With Bridget planning to take 3 months of partially paid maternity leave, they were facing some difficult choices. We might need to move even further out of the city, Robert explained during one of our coffee meetings. But the commute would be brutal, and with a newborn. After careful consideration and consultation with my financial advisor, I made a decision. I wouldn't help them buy a house or pay their rent directly, but I could provide targeted assistance that would benefit my future grandchild. I'd like to help with the baby expenses, I told Robert. Crib, stroller, daycare costs for the first year. Those things add up quickly, and it would free up your income for better housing. The relief on his face was immediate and profound. Mom, that would be amazing. Thank you. There are conditions, I added firmly. This isn't an open checkbook. We'll discuss specific needs and reasonable costs. And Robert, this doesn't mean I'm ready to reconcile with Bridget. I'm doing this for my grandchild and for you. He nodded, understanding the boundaries I was establishing. She's different lately, he said hesitantly. Quieter. I think losing the house and dealing with our money problems has been a wake-up call. She actually asked me last week if I thought you might be willing to meet for lunch sometime. I was surprised but cautious. Perhaps after the baby comes, I said. Let's not rush things. As October arrived, bringing brilliant fall colors to the city parks visible from my condo windows, I received an unexpected invitation. The local senior center was hosting a 6-week workshop on helping grandparents navigate changing family dynamics. The timing seemed providential, and I signed up immediately. The workshop introduced me to a dozen other grandparents facing similar challenges. Strained relationships with adult children, boundary issues, conflicts over child-rearing approaches. Our instructor, Grace, a family therapist with 30 years of experience, offered practical strategies for maintaining healthy connections while protecting our own well-being. Your relationship with your grandchild doesn't have to be defined by tensions with the parents, Grace explained during one session. You can create a separate, special bond that exists alongside those complications. Through these classes I met Irene, a widow whose situation mirrored my own in many ways. Her daughter and son-in-law had moved in temporarily, after college and stayed for 7 years, gradually taking over her home until she felt like a guest in her own space. Unlike me, she'd eventually moved to a small apartment, letting them keep the house in exchange for a modest monthly payment. I sometimes regret it, she admitted as we shared coffee after class one day. Not that I minded giving them the house, but that I didn't stand up for myself sooner. They never learned to respect my boundaries because I never really set any. Her words validated my own difficult choices. While my approach had been more dramatic than hers, the core issue was the same. Teaching adult children that parents are individuals with rights and needs of their own, not just resources to be used or obstacles to be managed. In late October, I received a panicked call from Robert. Bridget had gone into labor 6 weeks early. I rushed to the hospital, setting aside all past grievances in the face of this family emergency. The next 12 hours were a blur of waiting room anxiety, brief updates from harried nurses, and Robert's pale, frightened face as complications developed. Little Lily Eleanor Thompson arrived just after midnight, tiny but fighter. She needed to spend 2 weeks in the NICU, her small body connected to monitors and tubes that broke my heart to see. During this time, something remarkable happened. Bridget, exhausted and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen her, actually reached out to me. "Thank you for being here," she said quietly one evening as we both kept vigil by Lily's incubator. "Robert told me how you're helping with the baby expenses. You didn't have to do that, especially after everything." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, which felt like a small miracle under the circumstances. "She's my granddaughter," I said simply. "And you're her mother. That creates a connection between us whether we chose it or not." Bridget nodded, her eyes fixed on Lily's tiny form. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately. About what's important. When we thought we might lose her." Her voice broke. Nothing else mattered. Not the apartment, not money, nothing. It was the most genuine I'd ever seen her, stripped of the calculation and ambition that had defined our previous interactions. In that moment, I glimpsed the woman my son had fallen in love with, before greed and entitlement had warped their priorities. When Lily finally came home in November, I helped them settle into their small apartment. It was indeed cramped and noisy, with the wail of fire truck sirens several times a day. But watching Robert and Bridget navigate those first weeks of parenthood reminded me of my own journey with Frank all those years ago. The sleepless nights, the overwhelming love, the terror of responsibility for this tiny human. As Christmas approached, I made a carefully considered decision. Using some of the investment income from the house sale, I established a college trust fund for Lily. I also offered to help Robert and Bridget with the security deposit and first month's rent on a better apartment in a quieter, family-friendly neighborhood. "This isn't a gift with strings," I explained when presenting them with this offer at a small dinner in my condo. "It's an investment in Lily's well-being and in our family's future. But I want to be clear. I'm not buying my way back into your lives, and I'm not creating dependence. This is a one-time offer to help you get established in a better situation." Bridget, to my surprise, was the first to respond. "We appreciate it more than we can say," she said, holding Lily against her shoulder. "And I owe you an apology, Eleanor. The way I behaved, the things I said and did. I got caught up in wanting things. A big house, financial security, status. I convinced myself we deserved your house, that you owed it to us somehow. I was wrong and I'm sorry." The apology, clearly difficult for her, seemed genuine. Robert looked stunned, then profoundly relieved, as if a weight he'd been carrying alone had finally been acknowledged. "I'm sorry too, Mom," he added. "I should have protected your interests, not just gone along with what Bridget wanted. Dad would have been so disappointed in me." "Your father loved you more than anything," I said, feeling tears well up. "He would have been disappointed in your choices, yes, but he would never have stopped loving you. Neither have I." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for us to simply return to how things were before. But it was a beginning, a foundation we could build on moving forward. As I held little Lily later that evening, watching her tiny features that somehow combined Robert and Bridget while being uniquely her own, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. My life had taken an unexpected turn, but the view from where I now stood was beautiful in ways I couldn't have imagined. I had a comfortable home that truly reflected me. I had new friends who knew me as Eleanor the person, not just as someone's mother or wife. I had financial security and the freedom to pursue interests I'd neglected for decades. And I had the profound satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. The house on Maple Street was gone, replaced by modern townhomes for young families just starting their journeys. But the strength I'd found through losing it remained, a foundation more solid than any physical structure could provide. 1 year after selling my house, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. My downtown condo had become a true sanctuary, filled with light, art, and furniture I'd chosen solely because it brought me joy. My calendar stayed pleasantly full with watercolor classes, book club meetings, and coffee dates with new friends who valued me for exactly who I was. Lily had just celebrated her first birthday with a small party in the park near Robert and Bridget's new apartment. They'd found a lovely 2-bedroom place in a family-friendly neighborhood, using my help with the security deposit but managing the rent themselves through careful budgeting. Watching my granddaughter toddle between adults, her face alight with curiosity and joy, I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced since Frank passed away. My relationship with Robert had gradually healed over the months. We'd had several honest conversations about the past, including difficult discussions about his passive role in Bridget's scheme to take over my house. "I was a coward," he admitted during one particularly emotional talk. "I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I told myself it was for your benefit, that you'd be happier in a retirement community. Really, I was just avoiding conflict with Bridget and taking the easy way out." His recognition of his own failings had been crucial to rebuilding my trust. He'd begun seeing a therapist to work on setting better boundaries and standing up for his values, changes that were visible in his interactions with both Bridget and me. Bridget remained more complicated. While she'd apologized and made efforts to be respectful in our limited interactions, there remained an underlying tension between us. I suspected she still harbored resentment over the loss of the house and the financial security it would have represented. But she was genuinely devoted to Lily and making an effort to create a healthy family dynamic, which I appreciated and supported. The most unexpected development in my new life was William. I'd met him in the building's community garden where he tended herbs with the same meticulous care Frank had once shown our vegetable plots. A widower of 7 years, William had a quiet humor and thoughtful nature that drew me in despite my initial reluctance to pursue any romantic connection. Our relationship evolved slowly from neighbors to friends to something deeper. William understood the complexities of loving someone new after decades of marriage. "We're not replacing them," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from my balcony. "We're honoring what they taught us about love by finding the courage to love again." When he suggested we consider sharing a living space to simplify our lives, I surprised myself by being open to the idea. Not marriage, we both agreed, but companionship with the practical benefits of combining households. We were exploring options, taking our time, enjoying the freedom that came with making choices based on our own happiness rather than others' expectations. I'd established a modest educational trust for Lily, ensuring she would have resources for college regardless of her parents' financial situation. This decision gave me peace of mind while also demonstrating my commitment to being part of her future in a meaningful way. One sunny afternoon in May, Bridget asked to meet me for coffee alone, something that had never happened before. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed. "I want to thank you," she began after we'd settled at an outdoor table, "not just for the help with Lily, but for teaching me an important lesson." I raised my eyebrows, waiting for her to continue. "When you sold the house," she said, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined, "I was furious. I thought you'd ruined everything. But looking back, you actually saved us from ourselves. Robert and I were building our future on expectations rather than effort. We thought we deserved things we hadn't earned." Her candor surprised me. "That's a difficult realization to come to," I acknowledged. "The past year has been hard," she admitted. "But it's been good for us, for our marriage. We're building something real now, something that's ours, not something we're waiting to inherit." It was perhaps the most genuine conversation we'd ever had. While I doubted we would ever be close, this honest exchange felt like a significant step toward a healthier family dynamic for Lily's sake. As I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months, from the pain of betrayal to the peace of my current life, I recognized the profound gifts hidden within that difficult experience. The loss of my beloved family home had forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed and create a life that truly reflected my own desires rather than others' expectations. I'd learned that standing up for yourself is never too late, that boundaries are not just permissible but necessary for healthy relationships. I'd discovered that family isn't defined by property or possessions, but by respect, honesty, and mutual care. Most importantly, I'd realized that the end of one chapter doesn't mean the end of your story, merely the beginning of a new one that might contain unexpected joys. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating had ultimately led me to a life with more authenticity, stronger boundaries, and deeper appreciation for genuine connections. The revenge I'd taken in selling the house had provided a necessary wake-up call for Robert and Bridget, forcing them to face reality and begin building a life based on their own efforts rather than anticipated inheritance. As I watch Lily grow, I'm determined to share these lessons with her in age-appropriate ways throughout her life. I want her to know her own worth, to stand firmly in her truth even when it's difficult, and to understand that love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be diminished or taken advantage of. Life takes unexpected turns, and sometimes the path you never would have chosen leads to exactly where you need to be. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to positive change in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, please like and subscribe to support this channel. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and create the life you truly deserve. Thank you for joining me today.